Hello, hello. Melissa Santana, your co-host of the Miss Texas Show. I'm super excited, as always, to bring you another edition of our show. And today we have our wonderful guest, Doug Probst. And so Doug is an author. Doug is an experienced addiction counselor. Doug is someone who's had a past life with sex working. So is going to be able to speak to us today about his experience with that. Doug is also an author, and Doug just has, many claim to fame, and it's an overall writer as well. So with that, we are definitely going to be interviewing Doug today. I hope you tune in. It's going to be an exciting and wonderful conversation. So we look forward to having it, and we look forward to having you tune in. Thank you.
The Ms. Texas Show is a voice of hope for victims, survivors, advocates, and community leaders against gender-based violence to share their stories and resources. We began showcasing life in Texas. Today we are impacting lives not only in Texas, but also around the world. Under our segment Military Time, we run this segment in partnership with the National Veterans Chamber of Commerce. We invite military and veterans who have overcome traumatic events to share their experiences during and after their military service. Under our Beauty segment, we invite fellow pageant winners and contestants, artists, musicians, actors, models, and dancers, and last but not least, our survivor leaders from family violence, sex trafficking, sexual assault, stalking, and other traumatic events, who are ambassadors for these causes to share their lives and the impact they have made. To become a guest on our show, email us at msusatexas@gmail.com. If you would like to support victims and survivors of gender-based violence, make a tax-deductible donation to Hope Picks Global at www.hopepyxglobal.org.
Hello, everyone. Melissa Santana again here, your co-host of the Miss Texas Show. Excited as always to bring you another edition of another show and to have you here with us, tuning in and supporting as always. So with that, we are always excited to bring you a different guest. And today, we are no less excited because we have the wonderful Doug Probst. And so Doug has an incredible, definitely has done incredible work. And so I'm super excited to get into not only his journey, but just his accomplishments, all the things he's working on, and of course, what's to come in the future. And so Doug is the author of the memoir, The Musings of a Narcissist. He has a career in music that's actually spanned decades. So he's actually been in the music career for a while. He actually went on to also become an addiction counselor. So I'm definitely going to look forward to diving into that. Lives in California with his wife, Marie, but also has a background, we'll be sharing with us some of the abuse, unfortunately, that he did face, but also overcame. A lot of the different things that, he can educate us on and bring more awareness to. And so we'll be diving deeper into all of those topics.
Wow.
I'm impressed. Yay. So with that being said, yes, Doug, it's super a pleasure and honor to have you on the show today. So first thing I just want to ask is, since viewers, it might be their first time meeting you, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself, your journey, what led you here today, all of those wonderful things?
Well, I was born up in Northern California on Travis Air Force Base, which is my father was in the Air Force. Not much of that time do I remember, obviously, but he was not a good man. He makes evil look good. He was a child rapist, and he was raping my sister and I from very early on. The most horrible aspect of the whole thing for me. I mean, I'm getting right into the abuse, but I'll also say this: follow my ADHD, okay, please. Do the best I can. I do the best I can. And I don't take pills or drugs or anything for it anymore because I got sober 12 years ago. But at a very young age, I showed very high. I was a prodigy as far as piano, guitar. I could play Bach and Beethoven by ear. But I love Stevie Wonder and the Beatles, and I didn't want to play Chopin and everything. Although I did like it, but even with the dysfunction in my family, to use a ubiquitous term, they more than dysfunctional, but even with them, they took notice of that and got me a piano teacher. And so I learned up to classical level, and then I know how to play all the instruments. I mean, some of them are behind me. The keyboards, the bass. I was a bass player for Billy Preston. I got all kinds of videos showing when I played with Prince and all kinds of people. But as a child, very early on, as I mentioned in my book, my father was a hideous, evil, I call him, walking orifice, just a man who was so sexually deviant. I don't know that there's really a word that could describe it. He was raping my sister from 3 years old on. And at the same time, there's a section in my book where I talk about, I try to put the reader right there because it was so, it's such an event that I remember still. At only 3 years old, he was beating me in the face so bad that I had blood coming out of my eyes and my ears and my nose. And my mother, who never protected us and didn't believe us when we told her that Jamie was being raped. In other words, we went to the police and the police sent us back to the rapist. And so we were living in what I call a house of horrors. And, I'm not saying this to portray myself as a victim, but I was. When you're a child, you are a victim. I didn't have a choice. So, when you never knew what would upset him. He was the type of guy that, personality of a can of paint. And when he was mad, I never knew. And when I pull out a guitar with him, here's an example. I pull out a guitar and we try to play guitar together, and he couldn't play very well, but I could play, at 5 years, 6 years old, and I said, he'd throw his guitar at me. You little, and it was like my mother would stand there and go, that's strange, but she wouldn't do anything about it. She wouldn't say, hey, don't hit. She would, she was and help me not go off track too much. This is the 1970s. This is not the 80s, 90s. This is the 70s. Okay, this is when, sexual attitudes were extremely liberal. We were at the height of anything goes, anything goes, which is one of the reasons why, AIDS showed up in 1981 in America. When you go that far, there's going to be now, most of my friends, a lot of my friends are gay. So it's not about, they are not to blame for the virus landing in their community. But like I said, it's the result, in my opinion, it's the result of the 70s. Just like, you had programs where teachers would have sex with the I just saw the soap, I love that program, where there was an episode of the teacher having sex with a 16-year-old boy. And there was no call for the police. There was no nothing. When I was in boys' homes, because they put me in boys' homes at 12, I was again sexually raped and by priests and counselors, guards. Everybody did that. For me, it became like the norm. I just come from a house where my own mother tried to have sex with me. I had to be the parent at that time. I actually came home from a home pass from a boys' home I was in, and there she was, spread-legged. I don't want to be too graphic, but I have to tell the truth. Honesty is very important to me to get, that's how we heal. We let it out and we tell you, hey, you know what? You got to face it. If you're going to listen to this, you listen to the truth. If you say to me, I don't want to hear it, well, then what you're saying to me is all you think about is yourself and your own feelings. The truth is, I come home, my mother's spread-legged, got a bottle of vodka, and the next thing you know, she's talking dirty to me, saying, do this to, F me, all that stuff. And I have to be the parent and clean this up because at that time, 13, she's married to a gangster who was dealing heroin. And if he came home, he would have killed me. So there wasn't a lot of happiness, but there was happiness in my musical. What was therapy for me then to get away from what was going on was to write songs and to go to they had a piano. And I had my guitar, and I'd go in my room and I'd play and I'd write songs. I wrote a song about my sister, because I walked in on my father raping her a few times, and he punched me and knocked me out and pushed me out the door. And I wrote a song called "The Truth" because I was never gonna, deny it. And the line, I'll give you a couple lines from it where I say, you know. And as I pound upon the wall, I hear screaming down the hall, but there's nothing I can do to make the screaming end. And even though we cry in vain, I know it helps ease the pain because Daddy's got his fingers inside my sister again. But in the end, you know, I take it to where there's an arc where I triumph over the pain. I say, you don't have to worry anymore, Jamie. I'm going to be here for you. You know, unfortunately, when we come from this level of abuse, we're either dead by 22, or we're in prison, or we're full-blown drug addicts who don't give a damn about anybody else, which is one of the reasons, that was good. One of the reasons why I named the book at the time, I started writing it 10 years ago, a long time ago, you know how long it takes. And I wrote Musings of Narcissist. Now, the word narcissist is like everywhere, it's ubiquitous. So, you know, I could have titled it something else, but the reason I did that was because I was sober and I was, you know, trying to be, you know, trying to be really learning humility, because I wanted to be there as a counselor for other people who had been through the abuse that I had been through. And I can tell you, when I did that, I was looking at my own actions, and there's definitely some narcissistic tendencies in my personality, and that comes from abuse. A lot of it came from abuse. Some of it also came from my ego. My ego was not my amigo, but that, you know, when you can play music on the level that I could play, which doesn't make me a doctor or a rocket scientist. At one time I thought, if you can't play Beethoven, you're nothing. You're not like Stevie Wonder, who are you? But if you're a doctor, you do all that kind of stuff. Okay, you might be a bug. Yeah, I understand that's more important. But at the time, to me, that was everything. So what sexual abuse does, and I can say this from having a caseload of clients, is it creates an egomaniac with no self-esteem. It's like there's a complete disconnect between, wow, everybody wants me sexually, so there must be something incredible about, and we become manipulators. We become, you know, what we become, and it's not nice. But at the same time, you know, we're acting like we're all this and that, but inside we are so broken and ashamed that, you know, most of us either end up, you know, doing the needle. I say that in my song about my sister. You know, I know the needle takes the pain away. But every time like I always say, every time I tried to run away from me, I always found myself with me. I couldn't get away. Wow, that was all over the place, but I got somewhere. But I was taken out of my parents' home at 12 by the authorities. And in my book, I talk about that. Once again, Musings of a Narcissist. Now I wish I would have titled it something else, but you know, I explain why I say narcissist. I went into Rancho. I went into juvenile hall first because I actually took back then, you know, pot was everywhere. It was all marijuana. And now it's legal, but it wasn't back then. So I took some pot from a drug dealer down the street, and he caught me and took me to the police. And they saw what was going on in my house, how bad, you know, they found my mother on the floor with the heroin down and all this stuff, and said, we got to take him out. So I went to juvenile hall. And of course, in juvenile hall, I mean, in some ways, it's worse than the adult county jail, because you've got teenage killers in there who, you know, first time somebody called me dog, I said, no, I think you got it wrong. My name's Doug. Next thing I know, I'm in the infirmary. You know, it's like, you know, that's just the way it was. And after a couple of years of that, of being in boys' homes and being raped by brother Dan Dobbins, and all of the sexual things that went on in there, and from the counselors and priests, everybody, you know, nobody had any qualms about being caught, because even if you were caught, the times were like, okay, that's not so bad, you know, blah, 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 blah. It's almost like the atmosphere of those years were, it's not so bad. We're not figuring out yet that this is the ultimate betrayal of a child. you know, I have a son, he's 32. You touch my kid when I raised him on my own. When he was 13, they'd be putting pins in your neck. You know, there's no way, because, you know, this is a 13-year-old baby. This is my kid. This is my son. But I didn't have parents like that. So, you know, counselors and boys' homes and priests, and I was in a Catholic boys' home, Rancho San Antonio, and Brother Dan Dobbin and Father O'Rourke, they didn't have any worries about my parents finding out, because my parents never even visited me. So I would end up getting in fights after being beat up for 2 years. I turned the other way. You know, back then you could take golden gloves and all that stuff. So I became a fighter, and I would just hit you before you came to me, and they'd send me to the box in juvenile hall. I loved it. I didn't have to deal with all those crazy screws. You know, a lot of people don't like being in solitary. I liked it. And so in my book, I also talk about a lot of stuff that happened. You know, there was a time when my appendix burst and I almost died because the nurse didn't believe me in juvenile hall. She thought I was faking my pain. They finally got me to the county general hospital where I'm handcuffed, and all the doctors were working on some guy who had shot somebody and was shot in the head. So I came this close to dying because my appendix had burst and it spread the poison all over. And I wake up it's an interesting story. I wake up in a room with a Mexican guy that I knew from a boys' home and a black guy that he shot his own leg off while he was chasing a crip. He was the blood. And it was just all three of us had interesting conversations and just, you know, threatening each other. And I'm like, what are you going to do? You don't have a leg, you know? And then the other guy, you know, he wakes up and gets charged with murder. He didn't even know what he did. He got screwed up. Anyway, so yeah, I mean, you know, my childhood, I would definitely call it a downbringing. It wasn't an upbringing. It was like, you know, and then at 17, all of a sudden I get called from Silmar Juvenile Hall, and I had spent 5 straight years. Remember, I didn't see, let's say, your world. I didn't see the world from 12 to 17, from 1977 to 1982. I didn't see all the changes. 1977, I went in, there were magazines and pinball machines. When I came out in 82, there was cassettes and they were starting to make CDs, and there was video games. So it was complete. I was like, what? What is all this? You know, and they let me go and they emancipated me to the streets. They felt I was smart enough to make it on my own. Thank you. I mean, like, you know, there was no help. They have a lot more organizations now. We have a lot of places that kids can go to. I didn't have that then. At least I didn't think I did. So, and I couldn't go to my social worker dropped me off 3 blocks from my mom's house. Say, I got to write in the report that I'm dropping you off at your mom's house, but I'm encouraging you. I'm telling you, don't go there. Don't go there. Just go. And I go, what am I supposed to do? I've been locked up. And he goes, here's $200. He gave me $200, and it's all in the book. But I chose to go to Long Beach instead of where I was. Long Beach is actually larger than Cleveland. Cleveland used to be a huge city, but a lot of people moved out. But Long Beach is a large city. It's LA and Long Beach. They're together. LA is much larger. But to me, Long Beach was the big city. So I walk and catch the buses and step on park benches and whatever. I'm homeless. And I went to Long Beach. I don't even know why. I just had a feeling there was a lot of gay men down there. And when I was in the system, you know, sexual abuse, it turns your abusers into your family. It's like, I wanted more of that because they paid attention to me. Maybe I could sell myself, you know, and that's the other, you know, atrocious thing that I didn't realize for years is that I had all this talent. You know, I did get a tour with Billy Preston at 18, and that enabled me to get off the streets and stop hoeing and prostituting and whatever. But in the beginning, all I thought I was good for was sex. You know, use me, pay me. You're gonna pay me. You know, and I did, but I got paid well. but I was ashamed and embarrassed at the same time of what I was doing. So when I see other people, I would get a job at the Hyatt Regency. I played piano there for a while. I did waitering. But back in my head, you know, the shame of what I knew I was doing at night, escorting with these guys. And then it was May 6, 1982 that I was emancipated. I think it was like a month or two later. I was standing on Broadway, which was the hustler. It was like Santa Monica Boulevard in West Hollywood. And some guy comes up, he's like an angel born of the night he wins. He just comes out of nowhere and says, hey, you better watch it here. There's like 50 guys who have died from this thing called gay cancer, or they've gotten some kind of thing. And I immediately went, that's why my friends are dying. Like, because I had friends like Paul Andrews who had been kicked out of his father's house. His father was a minister and hated his son because his son was gay. And I didn't understand that. I said, to me, if you're gay, you're gay. And that doesn't make any difference to me. And I love Paul. He was a sweet kid. But he had this huge cough going on. And that was a sign of, the HIV virus. But we didn't even know what it was. We didn't have a term AIDS. We didn't have AIDS. We didn't know there was a virus. And he died at my apartment. I had to call the authorities to come pick him up. And before I turned 18, 30 of my closest friends died of that disease. 30. I mean, can you imagine that? I mean, most people are probably enjoying their senior year of high school. Well, I'm burying and helping to bury kids who are castigated not only for who they were, but, they're dying from this horrible, grisly disease. It's making them go blind in the bushes, everywhere. And this was my reality because I was on the streets. Luckily, I found my way into Hollywood and I was, I knew I had talent and got picked up on some tours, but it didn't really, the sexual abuse was so ingrained, the after effects, the shame, I would say the shame, that's why I call it the ultimate betrayal. Even though I was physically abused too. But, I still saw myself as a sex object, and I would sell myself everywhere I went. It was all about, what I look like, what could, that kind of thing. I just made it, I didn't make a mess in the early years. I just didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know how to navigate myself, even though I was on tours and I was making money, I was making a lot of money. I was still unsure of who I was. I was screwed up, put it that way.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, but also like you said, so I think yes, you did share, and I appreciate you. I definitely appreciate you sharing a lot of, what was your journey and all of that. But so there's definitely a lot there that I want to make sure also gets highlighted and, gets emphasized there is that agreeably. So I've heard some parts where you've said I was definitely messed up, and I agree. I mean, that kind of, you don't go through things like that though, and don't feel
don't go into porn. I went into porn. Right. You're on a roll. Go.
Yeah, no, definitely. But I was just gonna say, I definitely think that it's a disruption. I mean, your childhood is not meant to be led by those many things. And so I think to start, definitely want to start with that I agree. I appreciate not only that you shared, but I definitely want to acknowledge two things. One, it's absolutely not easy for you to have even gone through that. It's also not easy to have to always recount it as well. I'm glad that you were able to turn it into a book. You're now doing all this great work, but it isn't easy. I mean, we don't have to, sugarcoat that part at all. It's definitely was something. And like you said, it was trauma. And so absolutely trauma does take hold. I mean, for many reasons, but also it does teach you a lot. And so I think there's a lot that happens, right? I mean, we have our brain protecting ourselves during the trauma and, being there to help us so that it doesn't take over completely. But unfortunately, in the process, when we're also constantly exposed to a certain thing, it does kind of take precedence in your life. So I think you mentioned a couple of things that I think were interesting and, fascinating to mention is that definitely sexual abuse. I definitely heard that loud and clear. And it's unfortunate that, yes, you not only had to endure that, but from multiple individuals. So that definitely was first. But I also heard the violence. And I think that that's interesting because Absolutely. And for other people as well. There are people right now that are survivors of those types of abuses also. I think too, we sometimes try to isolate them and act like, okay, we talk about the sexual assault survivors, we talk about the domestic violence survivors, but we don't often talk about how most of the time they're actually intertwined. And sometimes people are enduring that abuse at the same time. It's not like just one thing. Like, maybe today, right? Maybe today it'll be rape. Tomorrow it'll be the punching. No, like sometimes a lot of that was happening. Absolutely. And then I think you also mentioned too that negative language. So I definitely feel that, of course, that's very strong. I mean, I heard it the loudest from your father, which is super unfortunate, but it made perfect sense. Like the little bit that I learned with that is that definitely this was somebody that had a strong personality, didn't know how to control, obviously, his actions and all that, but at the same time had an agenda. I mean, he knew what he wanted. He was getting it from his children, right? So, and who are the perfect people that he could control? Absolutely, his kids. And what are you as kids not supposed to do? You're not supposed to defy him. You're not supposed to say, well, Dad, I think actually what you're doing is pretty bad. And actually you did. At some point you did actually do that. And the problem is, he made sure that he could quiet that voice. So I think what I find incredible though about that is that you then found outlets. And so I do think that the music is incredible. I'm glad you had that like throughout, but also the writing. And so like you said, whether that was writing in songs, but also the fact that you went on to become an author. So I just think that the writing, you use it in different ways. And I do think that's the powerful thing about it. And I am glad you were able to turn your talents around. But I also wanted to highlight one quick thing too, is that we haven't had a lot of conversations on the show, at least that I've seen, about sex working. And so like sex workers. And so I want to make sure viewers, for those who may not know, you alluded to it, but I want to make sure they're clear on it. There are sexual assault survivors. So we want to be clear. There are individuals who face abuse. And in your case, Doug, like I said, I'm glad you had the courage to share with us. You face a variety of abuses, and you survived. To be clear, you survived them. You're on the other side. Thank God you're not still in that situation. You're here now with us talking today, and you are on the other side of it. But it was definitely something that took a very big, big chunk of your life. But you definitely, that's one thing. Sex working that you talked about is, I totally understand, like you mentioned, you got into that kind of line of work because, it's like you said, it was a life that you knew. And there's different, it's all you knew at one point, but also like it was something that, was comfortable to you. You knew all about it, and all of that. But I think that we want to make clear too that there's a lot of people who go into the line of sex working for different reasons. Like there may be different draws to it, and they may do it, but sex, those who are sexual assault survivors who have faced trauma is different from sex work, because sex work is where you like choose to then, chose to deal in that line of work, but it's not a bad thing. I don't think it's a shameful thing. Yeah, to be clear.
I can tell you have a lot of empathy for not just me, but for what you're talking. I feel it, and I just want to interject that I chose that, but obviously I would not have chose that had I not been sexually abused as a kid. But I chose it. And I name a few famous names in my book, because I got into high end, women and men. I mean, it didn't, and we can talk privately. I don't want to name there's some names I don't name in there because they are very famous, and especially the women, and they would sue the crap out of me just by putting the names in the book. There are famous people that have died that are in the book. I can tell you Robert Reed, Mr. Brady. I had an ad out, and I also used to hang out at the Polo Lounge in the Beverly Hills Hotel, where people would come and they'd pick me up and they'd offer me $500. There was a bar called Numbers on Sunset Boulevard and was it La Cienega, and I met many famous, and Michael Filerman, who produced Knots Landing and Flamingo Road, and actually Melrose Place was his character. He was like a father figure to me. What happened was I looked for father figures. It wasn't really about sex. It was about filling a void that I never had. And some of these men, and one of the men, and I'm not going to name his name. He's not named in the book. He starts off with him in the book because it was such an incredible scene that he never touched me at all. But he'd give me thousands of dollars to watch me. I had a lot of Radiohead friends and girls who watched me have sex with girls. But he was a father. Like, we'd go out to dinner and he would he had so much wisdom, and he'd compliment me and tell me, you know, I love having conversations with you. Now, him and Joe Thomas, who's another one that's incredibly wealthy, I mean, biggest gas and oil producer I shouldn't have said his name, of California, John Thompson. And I still know their children. I mean, I became friends with their children. And I'm not going to shame their children by outing their fathers or whatever. You know, I you know, I'm not out here in this book to shame anybody. There's one person I absolutely hate in that book who, and if you know, when you pick it up, it's available on Amazon, my website, notnow.com, because this was my name used in porn when I did all those porn stars. I want to tell you how I learned about my porn, because in the 80s, you know, you could live double lives and nobody would know. It was magazines. How was anybody going to know once you took pictures of yourself naked? Once the photographers, and they made all kinds of money. I was told all the time, like, you know, your pictures bought me that house. And of course, I'm 22 and I'm thinking I'm God. So it didn't mean nothing to me. But in 2006, my son was 16 and we were sitting at the computer and I just decided to Google Sean Mayott on a lark. Oh my God, it came up all over the world with websites and da-da-da-da-da-da. And the first thing I thought was, how can I capitalize on this? How can I, you know, they made all this money off me. How can I use it? So I decided to start writing a book. And there was also a page by a guy who's become a very dear friend of mine now, who owned my pictures at the time and has given me releases to use my pictures any way I want. John Cox, and he's a saint. And he had a site called Sharon's Ferry. And we all know what Sharon's Ferry is, taking people over to the hell, you know, your death. And it had all of the porn stars, or gay and straight adult film stars who had died he had them all listed in what they died of. And I was looking at the list and it's like 60% of them were my friends. And I'm looking at all of them, Lisa DeLue, John King, all these people that were my friends. And some of them, like I said, I nursed them. I've written 25 tributes and memorials to dead porn stars. I'd say that's a great name for a band. I mean, you know, for them, that have been put on the AIDS Memorial website. He's a friend of mine, Stuart Armstrong. And then my son Josh looks at the bottom and he goes, "Dad, you're still alive, look." And he looked down there and there's like this little teeny line, 2 lines of those known still to be alive. And my name, Sean Mayott, was on there. So I got a hold of John and we talked about it. And, you know, my mission was never to let these people be forgotten, you know, because by the time 2002, but in 1991, I had been to 97 funerals. I was also, this is all AIDS. I never thought anything could ever happen like that again, but we're seeing it now with COVID. I mean, it's wiping out, you know, I think it's up to 1 million people just in this country almost. But back then, you know, a lot of bigotry would stop funding for AIDS research and all that stuff. And I was partnered up with Elizabeth Taylor. I had no idea who she was. I didn't care. But she was the sweetest, nicest person who knew that helping bagging groceries and taking medication to blind dying men was more important than making a movie. I always have to give her that. But I was doing it too. I was working with APLA and at the same time raising my son. It was the best of times as far as my youth. I mean, in my 20s, I was king of everything. I played on stage with all these stars and all that. But at the same time, you know, it was horrible because every week a friend of mine died of AIDS. I mean, I was burying people, all 97 funerals. By 2002, 146 of my friends had died. And I want to put that out there because there's no doubt that that virus we could have fought the virus instead of fighting the victims. And a lot of the people use their energy to blame the victims. You know, it's your fault. You're a faggot. You're this, you're that. No. It just got into that community, and they were suffering. So they had to. My friends were having to endure battery acid thrown in their faces while they have AIDS, and no services. ever, anywhere. We had to create them ourselves. And so I just want to remind, you know, America that this is not something that can ever be forgotten. I mean, there still is no cure for HIV. I have a website where I put up, they made a first bone marrow transplant from a person with HIV, and she was cured of it. But, you know, there's been a ton of advances. But I mean, the advances didn't even come until 1995, and 300,000 Americans have died of AIDS. That's just my little, there you go. All right. And on my caseloads, what you were saying about, you know, us being screwed up, you know, basically parlaying, piggybacking on what I said. I mean, you try to, yeah, it's tough. I'm not a drug counselor anymore right now. I'm in between what I'm going to do, whether I'm going to go back full-time back into music, if there's any money in it anymore. All these kids are throwing their songs up on the internet and it's all for free. But anyway, or, you know, I might have a podcast, might do whatever I'm going to do. But on my caseload, if you really want to have, really be depressed a lot of the time, there's very few people that ever overcome what they've been through. You know, I had, you know, I'm not going to name names, but, you know, my first client was a woman who had spent 10 years in prison, and she was mandated to go to rehab, and for driving around with a dead body in her trunk. And what you were saying was very true. You can't get through to anybody unless they know they're not judged. There's no judgment. What you're saying about sex workers, she's a sex worker. I'm not judging you. I'm sitting here going in my head, like, you don't know what I've done. It's like all I ask is for you to be honest with me, and I will go to bat for you all the way. The problem is that, you know, 2 out of 10 make it or get sober and live a self-sufficient life. I mean, I had people that I was trying to get, you know, to learn how living in a cardboard box on Skid Row in downtown LA is insane. And when somebody's been doing that for 20 years, it's like hard to get that through. That's insane, you know. But I did have, you know, I'm proud of some successes with some people, but it's heartbreaking when you're, you know, on the night shift and you walk in, somebody's OD on the rehab and you've gotten close to them. I mean, I used to walk in and I'd have a line of people that wanted hugs, you know, a hug line, and like, you know, especially the women. I mean, you know, they could be the biggest manipulators in the world. At the same time, you know, I used to have them say, I'm beautiful, I'm beautiful, I'm beautiful. You know, I don't have to give myself up or whatever. Now, again, it's not a judgment that sex working is wrong. But if you're coming and you're in rehab and you're doing drugs because you want to escape the pain of it, then we want to get them out of it. We want to get you a job. Learn how, you know, be a person that's participating in society. And it took me a long time to do that. My son, in the book, you know, there's an arc, you know, at the end of the book, because I was told one time by my editor, man, this is depressing. You know, he goes, but there's a lot of funny stuff in here. And yeah, I try to use humor to take a lot of the edge off. But, you know, the last part of it is devoted to my son, because when he was born in 1990, his mother was not involved. So, I mean, she was barely involved. So I had to take him on 100% of the time. I did all the diapers, I did all the bottles, you know, I did. And, you know, there's no such thing as terrible twos. If you call your kid terrible, what does that say about you? I went through that. I had no partner to help me. And I loved it. I loved it. He, you know, he was my little boy. He was my little everything. And then it taught me. That was also one of the times when wow, you know, if I would have done what he just did, he dropped his grape juice, I would have been across the room. So maybe it wasn't me. Maybe I wasn't the problem, you know, and that's what started me on the journey of changing for the better.
Absolutely. Well, no, I agree. But I'm glad you brought it center, because that's what I was going to say as well, is that, so with sex working, the same, I agree. I do think that absolutely, and especially in your case, there are people who are in that line of work, and it is because of the abuse they face. Like they didn't know anything else. And so then, you know, they're not doing this. I do know there are others who they actually find pride in it. It's something that they actually like to do. It's a line of work that they chose. You know, that's what they want to do. And exactly, like whichever one, it's okay. But I'm just glad that you said what I wanted to capture, which is all that is that no matter what, I mean, that's why I think that society does a good job, unfortunately, of shaming and so of victims for many reasons. Not just
sound bites,
exactly.
And I always say this, when you're pointing fingers at somebody else, there's more pointing back at you. And also it's much easier to look at others' mistakes rather than to crucially evaluate our own. That's one way we stop looking at ourselves. If I'm, I would tell them, there's no judgment here on anything. Just be honest with me. And, that judgment halts progress. All judgment halts progress. I mean, that even comes from Jesus. I mean, it just comes from, if you judge somebody, if I judge my wife, she's not going to want to be around me, no matter what. And so, we're already judging ourselves. In other words, if I'm listening to you and I'm hearing you, and I somehow give an answer back that I've heard and makes you feel shamed, you're never going to want to be around me. Never, you can't, you just get more shame. We know what we've done ourselves. We don't need to be reminded of it. And, judgment's the worst. That's the worst. Trying to find blame and judgment, those aren't tools of help. Those are tools of cruelty, which is cruelty. That's all it is.
Absolutely. And speaking of tools of cruelty, I definitely feel that's why I'm glad you now have this new life, with new individuals, including your wife, and all the great things that you're trying to do with your son and the great mentorship that you provide to him, and all these great things that you do, just because tools of cruelty is exactly what abusers use. And so that's what's exactly, and it's effective. It's very effective, especially where it's coming from. Like in your case, a parent, I mean, my goodness, there's no more, effectiveness than right there, the person who gave you life. I mean, you're going to want to, part of you really wants to be able to respect them and have a relationship with them. And so unfortunately, when that's tarnished in that way, it's really hard to see past that, but also to think that, how am I supposed to defy this? Because, I'm actually inferior to this person. So on top of that, it does help to perpetuate it. So I'm very glad that you have such great individuals. But speaking of judgment, getting in the way of progress, like you mentioned, I think it's clear, however, that you're not there. You're now in a different place. Like you're doing a lot of positive things for individuals. I mean, that's the goal, and you're doing all these great things. But you also did mention, like you said, your wife. So I'm curious, how eventually was that transition? So you definitely went into all of the abuse, and like I said, I'm glad you shared, but what was that transition like? Do you feel like, how were you able to meet her? I'm glad that you guys are still married. Yay. I know I've mentioned some people that unfortunately, like you said, because the trauma is always there, some people have not been able to have healthy relationships, right? Because they might be in a different place in their healing journey, all of that. But I'm curious about that. How did you get to that other place, now, and, to where you are now?
Well, when it comes to her, I mean, my son was the first one that showed me, I had to be there for him full time. And so I had to get out of my head. And I was in love with him. It's like, how could you hit this little baby? He doesn't know any better. But when his mother, we didn't get along, put it that way. We were too young. But with my current wife, Marie, she's from Belize. And Belize is a very poor country. And she came out here in 2001. She's a lot younger than me. At that time, I was very wealthy, and I showed it off and all the narcissism with Mercedes. Money. I say now, money is only a tool. It'll get you anywhere you want to go, but it doesn't replace you as a driver. And believe me, I took money to a lot of dark places. But she taught me more about gratitude than anybody else in my life. I mean, this is a woman who had to walk through, might be killed, knifed off for 2 miles to school every morning. Her house was the only house on the block in Belize that had indoor plumbing. The ladies would still come down to the well with the things on their head and all that. And I had a lot of money, but she didn't ask for it. She didn't come at me like a lot of the women did when I was out there in Mercedes. I had a beautiful E320. But when she came along, it was like, okay, this is someone who's 18 years younger than me, but she is so much more of an old soul. I mean, she's at work right now. And I didn't get sober until 3 years into the marriage. I mean, she had to put up with a lot of my selfishness and narcissism. You know, I'm the rich guy. I did this for you. I paid for you to get, you know, it took 5 years. We did it the right way. She got legal we followed all the rules, and I had to pay off all the box checkers up there in the federal government. But it was the right way. You know, she's not illegal. And she got her green card, and then I got her a job with somebody but you know, there was so much gratitude there. It wasn't like, well, buy me this, buy me that, buy me that. No. If that's why I mismanaged my own money. If it was in her hands at the time, we'd have a lot more now. Now we do. So I have to give her so much credit. She taught me, you know, humility. She taught me that, you know, I'm nobody special. I'm not special. I'm unique. I'm a unique person, but I'm not special. I'm just one beggar trying to tell another beggar where the food is. That's all I am. And that's all we all are. And as long as we keep ourselves, you know, there's a saying that I love, and I wrote about it, but not this one. On the highest throne in the world, I still sit on my bottom. I'm still on my bottom. And, you know, just watching her by example showed me, wow, this one is, you know, really, really gets it. She really gets life. She really understands, you know, and she loves me for who she saw inside. You know, I used to ask her, as I was starting to get, you know, sober, because we've been married 14 years. In the beginning, you know, she saw me do drugs and she didn't understand it, so she didn't judge it. And then it got to where, you know, I'm like, you know, my Mercedes is getting towed and I'm losing it somewhere, and we'd have to pay to get it back. She's like, you know, you're wasting a lot of money. And she would take chances like that. And then I had an intervention with everybody and went to rehab, and it was over. It was like, okay, I get this. I got to stop this. I can't be like my parents. I can't be like, you know, I can't do this to people who love me. Why am I hurting the very people who love me? And she's still here. And yes, I think her growing up in Belize showed me how incredible, you know, I had a bad life. But I mean, you know, this is a third world country. And, you know, I'd show her ghettos out here, you know, in Long Beach. There's some really bad areas. You know, where Snoop Dogg, who was a friend of mine back then, LA, South Central, but they're nothing compared to what she, you know, believes. It's like, you know, they'll stab you to death right there, wherever. And I don't know if I'm making any sense. It's just, you asked about her, and I have nothing but praise and love. You know, she's a sexy woman who does not want to put pictures of herself in the bikini up there like I want her. I want to show her off. You know, I want to show you off. You know, that brown skin. Oh my God, that melanin in the skin. You know, she's part black, part my favorite. You know, well, black and Mexican, Latino together. It's like, you know, but she's a humble sweetheart of a woman who thinks of me first. That's something she taught me. You know, you got to get outside of your own head. You know, I can't, you know, one thing I tell my clients, or all of my sponsees in drug, in AA, is, you know, you can't hang out with the last person you got loaded with, yourself. You got to get outside of your head. You got to think about other people. When I'm thinking about my needs and someone else's character, I should be thinking about someone else's needs and my character. I mean, that's the bottom line. You know, the only way, I don't know if it's the only way, you know, other people overcome the abuse, I don't know what overcome means, but, you know, because it's still, like you said, the brain neocortex protects you. It does. But there's still an organ back here called the amygdala that sends signals because it's your brainstem and it records everything that happens to you. You know? So there's still that stuff. So when you see a guy going off at 7-Eleven and going to kill everybody because he didn't get 4 cents and change, he probably got beat up as a kid. You know, he doesn't know any better. But so it's always a little bit there. You know, I have to, you know, but I attend my meetings. I go to my AA meetings, and I have a support group, and I have my wife, you know, they're more important than drugs or doing something horrible. I don't know, you know.
Absolutely. And that's how, but see, that's why I think that that's how you can get to the other side, right? Like it takes those, you know, new sources of support, but also like reliable ones. I mean, it's not just that exactly, not just that you have support in your life, but I mean, 14 years, I think she's definitely proven her loyalty to you. I think she's definitely proven that she likes you just as much as you like her. Because I think love is a great thing, but I think it's also, I was just saying this yesterday, that like, I think it's also beautiful when people just genuinely like one another.
I gotta give you credit. That's more important than love. Yes, like and trust. Like absolutely first. And yeah, but you hit upon it. That's a good one.
Yeah, no, and I'm glad. And so that's why I just think it's just
like each other,
right. Yeah, just genuinely, exactly. Get back to the roots. Like just genuinely like that person and to be able to do that. Yep. And I think that what I heard, so I heard gratitude, but I actually also heard acceptance too. Like as you were speaking, I feel like she clearly accepted every part of you. And like there was nothing about you that scared her away, that like made her, you know, question it. She honestly like stayed true throughout all of that and was able to and was happy to see you, you know, go from one place in your life to the other place. And I just think it's also, that's why it's always more beautiful to be able to then appreciate life more with that person who saw you at your lowest, but then was able to be here with you at your highest, who also deserves to be in your life as a result, right? So I think it's beautiful. I think it's wonderful that, you know, that you have that person. And I hope that, you know, others can realize that too. And that's why I'm glad you shared, because clearly you came from all this abuse. You know, you went through all of these things, but there's still joy here. You know what I mean? That you were able, and thankfully, you know, your abusers didn't take everything from you, didn't take at least that from you, right? And like, and thankfully they're not here now to like still threaten that. So I'm just glad that it's something precious that you now have that you're able to share with someone else. And you always deserved it, right? But like you said, had to get to a place where, because of all these thoughts, to believe that you deserve that, and to then to be able to appreciate that. So even though, you know, it might have took some time, you know, you are here, and you mentioned it a lot, but I want to make sure that we do give time. You did write a lot of these things down. So definitely you wrote about these things. Yeah, so we're definitely gonna get to that. But what I'm also curious is, as you share about it, selfish plug, definitely get it. Yep. But I actually want to know about too the background. So like before, you know, I'm here that it's there, and I want you to remind us again where is the book available and all those things, but also how you got to that point. So like, you know, I know writing a book doesn't happen overnight at all. It's a process. So, you know, I'm curious about like when you started it, how you got it, and even how you got to publish it, you know, and all those things. So like, you know, for those who may be considering out there, like maybe I want to write a story, you know, and
a story. I just decided to write it. That's a very good point and a great question, because everybody has a story. Right?
Absolutely.
You got a story, write it, you know. Okay, so to answer your question, I had been told by a lot of people, you know, I was the type of guy that, you know, born with a penthouse in one hand and a cigar, you know, that's how I came out. And when I had, and then all the abuse and all the stuff I went through the system, and then getting on the streets and being at the epicenter, landing in the middle of when a disease is killing people, we have no idea. But I figured it out. That's one of the reasons I'm still here. I figured out how it was transmitted real early. So I've had a lot of friends who told me, you know, my son is working for one of my good friends, Neil, and they live in Redondo Beach, and they run a computer business out of the house. And he told me, like, you gotta write a book, man. You like dramatic. I mean, you toured with Billy Preston. You've been, you know, Dustin Hoffman wanted you to be his piano teacher, but not just names, but you know, you've been on the streets. You've seen death, and I've seen people get stabbed to death. I've seen all kinds of things, and all my friends dying of AIDS, plus the successes in music and other things. Write a book. So I thought, okay, you know, and all right, I started writing the book. But it was when my son and I saw that name, Sean Mann, because I did a lot of photos, nude photographs, and I was a centerfold for many Playgirl magazines in the 80s. I didn't think one thing of it, because I get paid $1,000, and that was a lot of money back then. $1,000, and I'd go home and I'd never seen the magazine. I didn't want to look at it, and yet 16 years later, my son's 16. We're looking the name up on it, and it's all, I mean, there's websites devoted to Sean Mayotte. There's all this in Argentina, and I'm thinking, oh my God, this is a dramatic life. Because, like I said, in the 80s, we could live double lives. Today, I had to get out in front of it because either, you know, I'm known as this tough guy, straight guy, blah, 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 but I did all this stuff. And all my friends, you know, I'm thinking, okay, now I'm on Facebook and I got this, and I'm like, we either tell the truth or the internet tells it for us. So I wanted to tell the truth. And that's the one thing I'm proud of the most. I tell on myself. I also tell the truth about everything. It's all honest. That's the most important thing. But I'm still not answering your question directly. The main reason was because if I was compelled to tell everybody what happened and what my life was like, because my family didn't give a shit. They didn't want to hear it. Even my aunts, who when I was wealthy, I was giving them money. You know, they would come every month to get their check. You know, and one time I told my aunt, you know, my mother, you know, I was starting to go, I was going through therapy a lot. And then bringing out all these angry feelings at my mother for what she had done, you know, never picking me up out of the boys' home. She could have taken me home at any moment. And then I take her to the Catholic, because I was part of that Catholic, Roman Catholic Archdiocese case. I took her to the movie, and she never once said, you know, wow, if I hadn't have been a drunk, you wouldn't have had to go through that. She didn't say anything. In other words, there was no connection that, you know, I already had a son. I knew that I would never let him be, you know, be attacked. And so I told my aunt that, and she said, I've heard all that before. I don't want to hear that again. So I cut them all off. I just cut them all off. My point is that I had to get that out. I had to tell the truth before those fuckers come out there. And they're not, you know, they're not. One family member who I was angry at for years because she was the worst. She got it worse than I did, my sister. I mean, she raped from 3 years old, then goes to my mother, and then she felt like it was her fault when, you know, my parents divorced. And then the rapist, my father, was never put in prison. He's never held accountable. She became a drug addict very early. At 13, she was shooting speed, and she was on the streets and all that stuff. The most surprising thing in the world that ever happened to me was when my sister got a hold of me. I don't know how she got a hold of me. She found me, and she said, I bought your book. Like, what? You never had any money in your life. You always borrowed money from me my whole life. And you're like, you bought my book. And she said, I didn't know a lot of that stuff that you did. I was on my own. I was fucked up on my own. I thought, I know that. And, you know, I want, but she corroborated everything in the book. That's the most important thing to me, is that people know that this ain't no made up shit. This is the truth. And my sister, she sent me an email just like, you know, I hated Dad too. I hated him for that. And it was like, we reconnected. So that's one of the most positive things that have come from writing my story is, yeah, you know, of course, you know, writing it and having to make it good, make it readable, and you know, like Spike Lee. Spike Lee is my favorite director of all time. He'll make it heavy, but then he'll tell a joke to take the edge off this brutal heaviness, and all of a sudden you're laughing. You know, it's brilliant. So I was trying to do a lot of that in here. So it's selling well. It's selling okay. But I didn't realize that editing, you know, writing it was 10 years because I was learning more and more and going back. Writing and then editing it was a whole big process because my editor, she didn't do the greatest job because I didn't have a lot of money to pay for like these great editors that charge $2,500 a chapter, you know, and it's like, oh, come on. And they don't even know me and they think they can edit my book. I manage singers. I talk a lot, but I manage singers, and I couldn't manage that singer if I didn't know who she was. We were going to have to make a career out of you. Who are you? Are you Tracy Chapman? Are you Stevie Nicks? Are you this? Are you know? And I'm thinking, you can't edit my book from afar. So I found a girl, and she really was a sweetheart, who not only had to get past all the sex stuff in there. That's another problem. That was another issue. And she did. She looked at the egg, and then she saw my pictures and blah, blah, blah. And she's like, and she said, and she also had to be with me when she was editing. I demanded that you're going to edit with me. In other words, I know you're more experienced in editing, and she was. She took out stories that were totally unnecessary to be in there. And she didn't do a lot of great typo editing, you know, but the content overcomes, from what I've seen on the reviews, from most of them are people I never knew before they bought the book. The content overcomes the typos and all that stuff. But I encourage anybody to write a book. What I was getting at when you were asking me how did we get the process, it's a tough process, and it does cost money. I mean, she charged $6,000. We could afford that. We could not afford, you know, 50,000, but you know, she charged that money, and she did a decent job. I will say that. And she kept me on a path where she would say, this doesn't follow this very well, this and that. So you have to write it first, and you have to look at it, and you have to be honest with yourself, and read it, and let other people around you read it, and be honest, and take the criticisms, and let them tell you. You know, Marie would read it. That's another thing I love about her. She's honest with me. She'll tell me, your shit stinks, man. You know, she'll tell me straight out what's going on, you know, without any fear of anything. And I need that. So, she'd read it. She'd go, well, this works. And that, wow, you really got me into that part, but you got to take that crap out. That didn't have anything to do with it. So went through all that. And then there's also, because Amazon controls 90% of the world's book market, it wasn't for me. I wasn't at the point in my book career, music-wise, I could play with anybody. But, you know, when it comes to books, you know, my first book. So I'm not going to be able to get into Barnes and Nobles. But we had to format it to Amazon's specifications, which was hard. And she helped with that. She knew the programs. It took a long time because we do it, and all of a sudden the pictures would make everything go this way. You know, pictures of my son and pictures of, when I was in the music business and people. But so we edited it. The writing process a long time. Then you've got to have it edited, and then you've got to format it, you know, to Amazon specifications, which is not easy. And of course, it's a faceless company like Facebook. You know, who are you going to call? They help you. Like, and the last part was designing the cover. And on the back of it, I have 3 big endorsements by a real well-known movie director. This is incredibly written. I could never write like that. It's like, oh, no wonder. John Whitbeck, founder, and Rich Ezra, who's publisher of music business, and he is a friend of mine. I've known for 30 years. But the cover, that's me when I was out there hoeing, and there's a little boy who's, you know, about to be abused, and there's a drawing that a friend of mine made of me when I was on the street. So I mean, you know, but it took 12 years. You know, it took a long time. It's not something, if you really want it to be good, and this is why I got to say this last part. Talk a lot. The last part is the marketing of it is the hardest part.
Definitely.
That's once you get to this point, it's like now the real work begins. How do I get this thing sold organically? Like, I'm not trying to push it, you know, and I'm not. I'm just trying to, you know, and I have to navigate social media. Interviews help.
Right. Absolutely. I know, right? Which is why I'm glad we brought it center.
Yeah, I'm so grateful for you. Yes.
Oh yeah, but thank you. And that definitely was exactly what I was hoping you could tell us, is that it is that, right? So it's not something that, you know, happens quickly, you know, it's not this quick turnaround, but it is absolutely worth it. Right. But I definitely seen a lot of benefit. And like you said, even the fact that, you know, it brought you closer, you know, to family in that way, it allowed you to vent about other family members. Exactly. Like, these are, and then those aren't things that you probably immediately thought were going to happen when you wrote it, but it was just a great benefit of being able to get that story out. So I think for so many reasons and more, for those who may be considering, please know that you're not alone, and that obviously, you know, it is worth it, you know, to be able to do it, and that your story is worth it. I mean, your story has value. Everybody's story.
Everybody's story has value.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Great work.
That's very true. So with that, I can keep you always, but it was a pleasure to have you. So I heard Amazon, but what was the website again that people can get?
www.mayot now, and I'm gonna spell it out. M as in Mary, A as in apple, Y as in yarn, O Tte Mayot, the name of my stage name, and then now, mayotnow.com. Somebody bought SeanMayotte.com and thinking that I had all this money and that they were gonna and put it up for $30,000 or something. So I had to do another one. But
okay, well, good. Yeah, but I'm glad, because I mean, you deserve to have your stuff and be able to. But that's true. That's why we got to make sure people, copyright what they have, and
you have to copyright it. Get your ISBN number right here. That's copyright. Just like songs, I tell everybody copyright your songs. If it gets stolen, U.S. Library of Congress is still a protection against YouTube and Google and everybody else is going to steal it. Also, I want to say, on the website, you can't get, we don't publish the book. I mean, you can get another book that I have on it that we published, but this one, you can only get it on Amazon in paperback. If you want the Kindle ebook, you can get it on either our website or Amazon. So either way. You can also get it in PDF format and download it immediately to your computer, which surprisingly to me, I thought that I wouldn't think that would be. It was just as powerful. It came off, I was just reading along and going along chapter. So there's options.
Absolutely. Yay. Well, I'm glad you clarified. So yay. So thank you. And so with that, again, pleasure and honor to have you today. Thank you so much for taking the time. And thank you all for tuning in today. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Melissa.
Thank you.
Much love.